What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the scouting system in Madden 22 and maybe reference a little bit of it going into Madden 23 because I imagine they're going to build off of this going into Madden 23. But I want to talk a little bit about scouting percentages because this has changed within the game. This is one thing that I want to take a look at. We had cut off this franchise a while back, and it's still technically sitting here in case we ever want to go back and play it. And this is technically on like the first iteration of the new scouting system. So if I go to scout college players, we're at the end of the Super Bowl here. We've basically scouted everything that we're going to know about these prospects within this franchise. And you'll see that a majority of the players are scouted to 50%. And I have an occasional 100% based on players that I've specifically focused or a position that I've focused on, 75% for a couple of other players. But as we go through, you can see that the vast majority of players are scouted to 50%. And this is something that we had all said was an issue for a long time, because this basically assumes that your scouts aren't doing anything, because you're not getting any valuable information on the majority of the players in the college class. At the very least, the top 60 players or so, you should know a lot about them, more than 50% of their skill set. You should really know just about everything there is to know about them, because this is a billion-dollar industry. They pay a lot of scouts to go out there and find information on these players. You should know like 75% at least, if not 65%, on these players. So what I want to contrast this with and basically update on is that they have indeed in recent updates, and when this video goes up, the updates could be considered old at that point, but nonetheless, what we have to consider here is that the updates have changed how much you're actually getting scouting wise. Whenever we go ahead to a current franchise, one that is only in week 8 of the season, and I go to scout college players, you'll see a much higher amount actually scouted on these players for a lot of them. So for positions that we've actually scouted, we're going to get a lot of 65 percentages. We're already halfway through the season and we know 50% about most of the players in the class. And if we sort this by position, for example, there are positions that I already know 65% about most of the players at that position, which is a huge step in the right direction. And that's, you know, them updating it, and I know that they've updated it so that you get more scouting on a lot of the players within the draft class. You can see some players even I have 80 on, 65 on others. You're going to get more scouting now on these players, and that's going to aid you in scouting this year and aid you probably in Madden 23 for scouting, because you're going to get more realistic percentages, more realistic knowledge about these players. You're going to have more to go off of, which is definitely a step in the right direction. Whenever we talk about, like I said, a billion-dollar organization, all of these teams within the NFL that make millions and millions of dollars, and somehow in the first iteration of this scouting system couldn't pay a couple of scouts to go out and find information on these players for you. Now, I'm certainly not saying that we need to have every little bit of detail on every single player like we used to be able to do. I mean, you used to be able to scout the majority of the information on all of the players that you wanted to know about, and it could be a little bit cheesy because you could basically pick the best players every single time you went through a round. I'm saying this is a step in the right direction, but I did want to call your attention to the fact that we're going to get more scouting off of these players as we go through franchise mode. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and start up another fresh franchise, and we're going to simulate to the off season and get an idea for how much we can truly expect to have scouted of these players, so that you guys know that information and can leverage that information so you can focus on the right positions, so you can focus on the right players and know ahead of time how much you're actually going to have these players scouted. And now, having advanced all the way to the draft phase of a fresh franchise, let's go ahead and take a look at how much scouting we're going to get here position by position. Now, we're probably going to get less scouting than we would still like. I mean, when we go in here and we take a look at this, a lot of these players are still going to be at 50%, so it's less than it should be. I mean, we shouldn't have a top 2 player at 50%. That just should never happen. That's so unrealistic. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of top 10 players here that are at 50%, but nonetheless, we're going to have 65% on quite a few more players, and we're actually going to have 100% on further players outside of that. I mean, you used to only be able to get 100% on like 3 players. If I actually go position by position here, you'll see that I have at least a couple of the quarterbacks scouted to 65%. I'm going to have a couple of the running backs scouted that much, and I'm going to have a couple of players at other positions. No wide receivers, so we're all at 50% here, which is a bit odd. Every single tight end is going to be scouted to 100%, which is actually really awesome, and we'll get into that in a moment, how that works, because that was not possible before. We certainly want to understand how to get that to work for us and how to utilize that on the positions that we want to see it on. We only have a couple of offensive linemen at 65%, but still more than we would have had before, and in fact, we're going to have quite a few defensive players as we go through here that are at about that 65% mark, which again, if we click into these players that are at 65%, we're still not really getting that much, if any, useful information off of them. We're talking about a right end here, and all I know is that he has B finesse move and C awareness. He's got F hit power, F stamina, C tackle, and B injury, which are all useless ratings to know anyway for the most part. So we're getting basically 1, maybe 2 ratings out of this guy that we care anything about. We're not getting his block shedding, play rec, power moves, anything like that. So 65% is still not ideal. I would like to see these ones increase to 75. If we focused on the player, we should know a little bit about them in some regard. And we just simply don't know anything about a lot of the players in the class. We do know more about some of these guys, though. We now have a bunch of 65s at cornerback, so that's helpful. There's been at least a handful of positions now that we have a decent amount of scouting on, but ultimately we have one position where we really know whether the players are going to be good or not. So let's go ahead and take a look at our region breakdown. Let's go ahead and take a look at our scouts and figure out why at tight end we are getting 100% scouting on these players, and how we can utilize that to our advantage now with another position that might be more helpful to us. And certainly we want to keep in mind that we're really only going to get one position at 100%, and most of the other positions we're still just not going to know quite enough information to really have success in scouting these players. So going over to our region breakdown here, we're going to quickly understand why this is the case. Our tier 3 national scout is scouting tight ends. So we're getting a 25% efficiency boost when scouting tight ends. So you can automatically expect those players to all go up to about 75%. And keep in mind that when I was going through all that scouting for those prospects and looking at percentages, I did not micromanage any of that. I didn't specifically utilize it to my advantage in any particular way. I just started the franchise and simulated up to the draft. So those things can certainly be micromanaged to get you better percentages to a certain degree. It's not going to be that much better than what we saw on the screen there, but we're at least doing better than we have done in the past. Our West scout is scouting middle linebackers. We have left ends scouted. And we also have another middle linebacker scout, which is giving us 5%, and we have our tier 2 scout giving us 15% on right guard. So that's why we saw some of those 65% on right guards. That's why we saw some of those 55% on middle linebackers. That's why we saw some of those 55% on defensive ends, and 55%, I should say 60% on middle linebackers, and 50% on others. But we're really getting the most efficiency out of our tight end. So you really do want to focus on where you're placing your tier 3 scout and where you're placing your other scouts, because you will get more information now than you did on the original iteration of this entire scouting process, but you're still not going to get that much information. Generally speaking, you're going to want to focus on a position that you really need. And to be honest with you, there's going to be good players in the draft class. It's just going to be hit or miss more so than in the past. I think that they're going about this in the wrong way of making these players hit or miss. It shouldn't be hit or miss based on your scouting. I mean, you know a lot about these players in terms of their physical skill sets, their intangible skill sets whenever you draft these players, but ultimately you don't know how they're going to fare against actual NFL competition and things of that nature. You don't know that they're going to come in with the right work ethic. They could in a interview have a great work ethic. Everything you studied about them shows a great work ethic, but that changes when they get to the NFL and they're going against different competitions. So I think that they're implementing the guessing game of the NFL draft in the wrong way. I do appreciate what they're trying to do to make this more difficult to draft the correct players, but nonetheless, I feel like they could have done this in a better way. I do appreciate the fact that they're giving us a little bit more scouting now, but to be honest with you, I was hoping to see more than this, and we're really not seeing as much scouting as we need to see from these players. Most of these players need to be at a minimum of like 65%, and the positions that you're scouting should be at a minimum of 75%, and the one position that you really focus on should be at 100%. So there is still a ways to go, and I'm hoping that they're working on it for Madden 23, but nonetheless, we've seen no real progress in Madden 22 since they said they were going to continue providing updates. And I made those videos but way back when saying about how the leaks came out stating that they basically abandoned Madden 22 franchise mode, and to be honest with you, that looks to be more the truth. So with all that being said, I did want to give you guys this information so you know how much you're actually getting from your scouting. It's still not sufficient, it's still not as much as it should be, it's still not enough, and it's still not correct and reflective of real life as it should be, but you want to have this information for your franchise modes nonetheless, and this is certainly something that you can look to be similar in Madden 23, I would expect. So hopefully this information was valuable to you guys in some way. If it was, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments down below. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you have a good one.